Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Karen Salpe. We hear stories about schools that look and feel like prisons, resistant students and teachers who fear losing their jobs if they don't stay focused on test scores. But there are also hundreds of public schools that have taken a close enough look at their students to figure out how to help them excel no matter how disadvantaged they are. Today we'll hear some of those stories and find out what we can learn from them to transform other schools. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Pedro Noguera, sociologist and education professor at New York University and author of several books on public education. He helped form the public policy group Broader, Bolder Approach to Education, a national campaign that addresses the impact of social and economic disadvantages on schools. Welcome, Pedro.
Okay.
I've observed classes in recent years that were lively and exciting and rich, and I've observed classrooms that feel like prison cells where teachers are tired, students are disaffected, school books are missing or outdated. Everything seems to be chaos and sort of hopeless. In your opinion, in your experience, what's going on in the teacher's head in a classroom where learning isn't really happening?
Well, there are probably a lot going on in that teacher's head. Right now, because of the pressures we put on schools and on educators to raise test scores, one of the things on their minds might be, what am I going to do to raise test scores?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if the teacher takes that narrow focus, then they're going to really emphasize preparing those students for the test and trying to drill them into hopefully higher performance. And that's probably why the kids you'll see are going to be halfway asleep and not particularly inspired. But it's also possible the teacher might have on the mind the fact that they're being asked to do more and more with less and less, mm-hmm. that they don't have the resources to work with, that the schools don't have the supplies and the textbooks, that the kids they're serving are underserved, and many of them are coming with unmet needs, health needs. We're seeing kids come to school hungry. We're seeing kids come to school in the wintertime without proper coats, and kids who don't have a stable place to live. And all of that impacts learning. Kids who don't have a stable home environment have trouble concentrating in school. Kids who need eyeglasses have trouble reading in class. We've ignored a lot of these basic needs that impact our children, impact their development. Our teachers are seeing it right up front, and this impacts their ability to teach them as well.
And one response to that has been sometimes that's the family's obligation, that's the family's responsibility. Why can't families sometimes meet those obligations?
Well, we like to blame families in this country, but let's face it, we have high rates of poverty in this country. We have higher rates of poverty and inequality than any other industrialized country in the world. And I think that suggests it's really our responsibility as a nation to address the needs of our families. We have, what people need to realize is that most poor people in this country work for a living. They're working hard every day to support themselves, support their families, and they still can't get by. And so I would say that those who blame the families really haven't spent enough time with those families. And I think one of the things we're really in short supply of today in America is compassion for poor people, and it shows.
I remember feeling sort of agitated and impatient in the grocery one night about 11:30. A parent had 2 or 3 young kids, first, second graders maybe, with her. And I thought, why on earth don't you have those children in bed? And finally I realized she probably has no other time to do the grocery shopping. If she may be working 2 jobs, she may not have child care, and she may not have a choice. But those children in school the next morning were not prepared to learn.
It's very simple. I have a daughter right now. She's a college-educated person, got a bachelor's degree, and has a great job working at the University of California, Davis. But she's a single mom. She just was divorced. And she was at home with us over the holidays, and I said, "Don't you have a regular bedtime for your daughter?" She says, "I commute an hour and a half each way. By the time I get home, it's already 9 o'clock. She still hasn't eaten dinner. We eat dinner at 9 o'clock, and then I bathe her and get her to bed, and often it's after 10:30. That's the only time I have to spend with her in the day." So no, I don't have a consistent bedtime for her. And I wish I did, but my lifestyle, my working conditions don't allow for it. And that's what I mean about compassion. We would like to see families put the needs of their children first. We would like to see families that are able to provide a loving, nurturing environment for their children. But we have to realize that in order for that to occur, our country, has to do a better job of making it possible for families to do that work for their children. And I don't think we've done that part. And it shows up in schools, because we're seeing so many kids come to school who are neglected by their parents, not because their parents don't care, although those parents exist too, but because their parents aren't present. Their parents are busy working. Their parents are not around. And as a result, we have a lot of children raising themselves. And that is a huge problem throughout the country, not just for poor children. Lots of middle-class children across America have limited contact with their parents because they're too busy, they're too focused on work, and not enough time for their children.
So we have kind of a vicious cycle. Am I correct that the best predictor of a child's success is the mother's education level, right?
Well, it's mother's education combined with family income.
Okay.
Income matters.
And so until we can raise the education level of that mother by teaching tomorrow's mothers better, we may not be able to fix this problem.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I think there's a lot we could do right now to improve educational opportunities for children, even when they come from families that don't have middle-class incomes and don't have college education. And we see examples of it all the time. We see kids who come from poor families, immigrant families who are doing well in school. But that's because a lot of times the parents are pushing, are encouraging, are instilling the right values, and at the same time, they're lucky enough to go to a school where their academic and social needs are being met. And when those two things occur, you can, in fact, break the cycle of poverty through education. It's just that we're not seeing that on a large scale.
Right, right. And I would think that either of those could break the cycle or could begin to. I've known students come from extremely disadvantaged situations who were fired up over a really good class or a teacher who believed in them. And I've known students who made it through bad schools because they had families really pushing for them. Gosh, if you could do both.
Right. We have lots of anecdotes of individuals who've risen beyond very adverse circumstances to excel. And we love those stories in America. We love the rags to riches story. We love the stories of resilience, of those who triumph against the odds. But what we need to keep in mind is that's not the average person.
But they let us off the hook for fixing the system, right?
Right?
I mean, of course we love it.
It puts the emphasis on the individual, the toughness of that individual. And what we have to do is not rely on exceptional people to address our social needs in society. We need to think more broadly about how we build safety nets for families. How do we build systems of support for children so that even children who are not as resilient, even children who are not as lucky and who haven't been inspired can still have a chance. Because that's what we need if our society is to prosper and to become a healthier place to live.
Now, we've had programs in place for a long time, Head Start programs to get early child education in place. We've had free and reduced lunch programs to help provide for nutritional needs, but we need to do more.
Absolutely. The primary emphasis of education policy from the 1960s till about the 1980s was on addressing some of the effects of poverty and inequality in our society. So we adopted programs like Title I to address some of the economic disadvantages, Head Start also to expand access to preschool, and a number of other measures, Pell Grants, to make it possible for young people from poor families to get into college. What's happened since the 1980s is that many of those programs have shrunk, haven't continued to be supported by the federal government, and instead what we've done is we've focused very narrowly on how to improve academic performance in schools, emphasizing test scores as a measure of academic performance, and ignored those other factors. And what we've seen as a result is that while up until the late 1970s, the achievement gap was actually closing in this country between African American and white students, between children of low-income families and higher-income families. We saw real progress in graduation rates, in college attendance, And since that time, there's been stagnation and actually reversal.
So there's some proof that those programs were making a big difference.
There's absolute evidence that it was working. There's an important article that came out of the Educational Testing Service called "Why Aren't We Making More Progress?" And the question they pose, these authors pose, is, well, why has the achievement gap basically stalled as an issue? And when they look at the data, they say, well, what changed was our focus on these social conditions in our society. And I would say that by emphasizing narrowly academic performance as measured by test scores, we have completely ignored everything we know about child development. And that has taken a toll on our schools. We now have, across the country, dropout rates of 50% and higher in almost every major city and many minor cities. And that, to me, is a clear indication that what we've been doing is not working. But our policymakers don't seem to get it. They keep thinking that if we simply raise the bar higher, if we just elevate the standards, that somehow that will pressure people, teachers and kids, into higher performance, and there's no evidence that it does.
But one of your most insistent arguments in all your writing has been that we need to expect that children can learn. We need to believe that they're capable of learning. And you've said that one of the strengths of No School Left Behind was that for the first time it made policy the ideal that every child is expected to learn. We're not going to let anybody drop through the cracks. That's had limited success, and as you say, test scores are a very narrow measure of progress and of real learning. But we do have to believe that every child can learn. But you're saying we can't just believe.
That's right. It can't just be an abstract belief. It has to be combined with the strategies that make that belief possible, right? That is, you know, if you want your team, if a football team wants to win, they can't just pray, although prayer is good. I know I'm at a religious institution. Prayer is always good, but you have to also practice, and you have to train, and you have to have some strategies. You have to learn from past mistakes. Otherwise, you won't get better. And I think the same thing is true in schools. No Child Behind took us a step forward as a country. Because for the first time in our history, we had a law that said there must be evidence that all children, regardless of their backgrounds, are learning. The problem was the only evidence we looked for was how well they did on a standardized test, which then distorted what we did. We focused very narrowly. So what we're seeing now across the country is in states that don't test children, for example, in science, in the 4th grade, science is being taken away. History is being taken away because we're only focused on math and literacy.
And I worry that we're teaching precisely to the test, and that instead of learning how to think about these issues, we're memorizing facts.
Well, absolutely. We just had the NAEP scores released last year, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, also called the Nation's Report Card. And something like 50% of 4th graders could not recognize Abraham Lincoln. Well, why? Because history is not on the 4th grade test in most states, right? And unfortunately, if it's not on the test, in many schools it's not going to be taught. And what should concern us, music's never on the test. Right. Art is never on the test. Physical education is certainly not on the test.
But why are those things important?
Because we need a well-rounded child, a child who's healthy, a child who appreciates the arts, because the arts sometimes bring out that motivation, that engagement, that intellectual curiosity in a child, nurture the spirit. We need a child who is interested in science, particularly now because science is such an important field to our future. We need children who have confidence about themselves and who have developed a desire to learn. And so the question we should be asking is not how do we raise test scores, but how do we get kids excited about learning?
And you've said to learn this, we need to look at what people are doing that works and why does it work. And two of the things that you've identified are engagement level and a sense of efficacy. And I'm going to ask you to explain both those concepts.
Yeah, engagement is really a multifaceted concept because it includes both the intellectual engagement, and you can see a child who is engrossed in a book, won't put the book down. You know, and many of us saw that with Harry Potter and other children's literature that had that effect. And that's a kind of intellectual engagement. But you could also go to classrooms where you see kids behaviorally engaged. That is, they're so caught up in the learning that there's no distraction. There's no need for the teacher to worry about management because the children are managing themselves by the activity of learning. But then there's also engagement at a relational level. That is, because of the relationship between the teacher and the student. The child, there's trust there. There's a desire to please that adult. There's a desire for that adult's approval. And that leads to a higher level of engagement. And all three of those aspects are an important part of getting our children to be motivated to learn.
And when you talk about a classroom like that, I get excited because my best moments as a teacher have been those moments where the students didn't want to leave, or they were still arguing about a poem at lunchtime.
That's right.
But I don't know, I can't pin down how I ever got those moments to happen as a teacher. What are we learning about that?
Well, the good news is those classrooms exist right now throughout the country, right? Sometimes even in some of the worst schools, you'll find classrooms where children are engaged in those ways. And the truth is that if you ask the average child, tell me who your best teachers are, they will name classrooms like that right now. What I think the challenge we face is in exposing other teachers to good teaching. Teachers work in isolation. And sometimes you'll have a teacher who is excellent at what she does right next door to someone else who's not, who's struggling to engage their students, but there's no conversation, there's no sharing, and consequently we're not able to learn from the success of their colleagues. So I would say that part of the collaboration of teachers is something we really need to look for. My colleague Debbie Meyer, a well-known educator, often says if the adults are learning, the children will learn. Because to be a teacher, you commit yourself, in effect, to lifelong learning. The teachers are constantly learning while they're teaching because they're constantly taking in new ideas that they're going to use to stimulate their students, but they're also learning from their students. And they're learning about how what they do with their students can be modified so that it's to be more effective in reaching a greater number of students.
How do you keep teachers from getting tired and burnt out? One of the things you're suggesting is some mentoring and some team teaching, maybe.
Absolutely. I think that the collaboration among teachers is a great way to help teachers stay inspired, because then they can inspire and support each other. I also think that teachers need sabbaticals. Professors, college professors get sabbaticals. The sabbatical is not simply to go fishing, but to study, to further their education, to take a break from the classroom, recharge batteries.
Critical thinking. You've done a lot of work on this, that in the best classrooms, students are critically engaged. They're asking questions. They might be challenging authority, and that might be encouraged. They're finding creative ways to solve interesting problems instead of skill and drill, memorizing facts and so forth. Why isn't that happening more in classrooms? And particularly, it's not happening in impoverished classrooms.
That's right. I would say that in our higher ability classrooms, our honors courses, our the international baccalaureate courses, we're more likely to see critical thinking being encouraged, creative work encouraged on the part of our students. It's when you get down into the more remedial classes that you see much more emphasis on drill and on skill development. And what we need to realize is that there's a difference between being low-skilled and unintelligent. Many of our children who are low-skilled don't lack intelligence. Right. They still have they may be very creative, they may be critical thinkers, but they do need to develop those skills. If those creative abilities aren't tapped and cultivated, we will bore those kids right out of school.
So you're not saying that they don't need to learn the skills, you're saying that
it's not an either or. They need both. It's a question of how you tap and develop those skills. And I'll give you an example. I had a teacher I was working with a group of teachers in Oakland, California. And this was a school that had a reputation for low test scores and discipline problems. And I was asked by the superintendent to work with the teachers there. And I came to the school to meet with the teachers, and they only wanted to talk about discipline. They didn't want to talk about the learning that was going on. And at one point, I posed a question. I said, suppose you were going to go teach in another country. What would you want to know about that country before you work there? And the teachers came up with a long list of things they thought they needed to know about the history of this country, about its culture, economy, politics, etc. And I said, okay, well, how much of those things do you know about the community where you work right now? And to my surprise, and although I wasn't that surprised, even though many of the teachers had been there for years, they could not tell me basic things about the community where they worked, about its history, about whether or not there was a supermarket or a library, or whether or not there were parks. All they knew about this community was that it had a bad reputation.
And that their students didn't behave well.
And that the students didn't behave well, and that there was crime. So I said, well, let's do a tour. Let's do a field trip. And we went out the next day, did a field trip of the community, went and visited parks and libraries and supermarkets, and even visited housing projects where we saw some of the children who waved at their teachers. Got back to the school, and almost every teacher said the same thing to me. They said they did not feel it was appropriate to go out. They felt they were being watched and scrutinized. They felt like tourists. They said, we don't need to know about the community to teach here. We don't need your help anymore. You're not helping us to deal with our problem. And then one of the new teachers, she said, well, I saw something interesting. I said, what's that? She said, I noticed that many of the homes in this neighborhood have gardens in the backyard. I said, well, why is that interesting? She said, well, I would bet that the soil is toxic, because many of these homes are surrounded by factories and foundries, and therefore there's probably lead in the soil. And if those families are eating food from those gardens, the food may be contaminated with lead. So everybody looks around. I said, well, that's a really interesting observation.
So you've got classrooms full of brain damage.
That's right. I said, what are you going to do with that? She said, well, I teach environmental science, and I'm going to incorporate that into my class this year. Now, she was a new teacher, just 2 years in teaching. So everybody's looking at Miss Smarty Pants. What does she think she knows, right? Mm-hmm. So I follow this teacher over the course of the year. And she starts by showing the children how the lead from the factories that's produced from the exhaust goes into the sky, what happens when it comes down through the rain and is enters the plants in the gardens and the soil, and is ingested by children. And they study this, and then the children go out and they test the soil in various parts of the community, and they for lead content. And they come back, and as they do, they start to plot and create charts showing the areas of the community where the toxicity is greatest, hypothesizing about why there might be an association between where a gas station was or where a foundry is located and greater toxicity. They produce this very elaborate report. And she's so excited by the work they've done, by their engagement
in this project. And they're learning the
project.
skills they need to do to accomplish this project that really matters.
That's right. Just like junior epidemiologists out there studying their communities. She says, Pedro, I want you to come and attend this class. And I sit there, and the students are presenting their work, and they're so, because when students present what they've learned, it's really the highest form of learning, because now they have to know that material well. They have a command of the subject. There's the confidence that comes from knowing something well. So both the teacher and I are very pleased by what we see. She's ready to move on to the next unit. One of her students raises her hand and says, we can't move on. She says, why? She says, because now we have to warn the people. He said, warn the people? She said, I hadn't thought about that. He said, yeah, because now we have to tell them that they're eating poisonous foods from their gardens. So she says, what are we going to do? How are we going to warn the people? I said, well, I don't know, but I did know the county health commissioner. So I go together, we go to see the county health commission, show them the work the students have done. The commissioner is shocked by what he sees because, again, the only thing he'd heard about this school was how bad the kids were, right, and how many problems it had. And so the commissioner says, I'd like to come and meet the children. And again, the children present their work. And the commissioner is very impressed by what they do. He says, listen, I don't know if we can solve this problem, but here's two things we can do. I will send out a letter to every family in this community and warn them about the effects of the toxic soil in the neighborhood. And I will offer any family that wants it free topsoil. We can do that. The children cheer. We're all happy. He's happy. But here's the real lesson. Those kids now know that science is power.
Right.
That science is a way to actually understand their environment. And some of those children may become scientists because of that experience. That should be our goal in education. Our goal should be to engage our kids so much that they understand that knowledge is power and that it actually transforms who they think they are. It transforms their identity. Those kids no longer think they're just inner city kids, right, who can only do what their parents have done. These kids now think that through education, they might be able to improve their neighborhoods, improve their lives. That's the power of education.
And discipline was no longer an issue for that teacher.
In a classroom where kids are that engaged, there's no discipline problem, right?
Yeah. You have been working on trying to transform policies. The Broader, Bolder Approach to Education program is going after the big picture. and there are so many changes being proposed or possible ways of looking at how we transform education. If you could change just one thing, or you got to pick what thing changes first, where would you go? Where should we go first?
Well, you know, we had three things, so you said one thing.
All right, I'll give you three.
Okay, thank you. We said, at the minimum, we need to make sure that all children have access to health care. We said, secondly, let's expand access to preschool. All the research shows that when children are learning early, when we start to cultivate their knowledge, their skills, stimulate the brain during infancy, it actually benefits them throughout their life. But thirdly, we also said we need to expand learning time. We need to, because many of our kids are not getting enough learning time. The day needs to be longer. The school year needs to be longer. Summer is a wasted time opportunity for kids. We need to look at ways to enrich learning experiences for a greater amount of time, because that's what affluent kids are getting right now.
You're really talking about shaping whole people.
We want young people who understand how to work with other people, how to cooperate, how to be good. What does it mean to be a good citizen? What does it mean to be socially responsible as a person? What does it mean to have character and a self-discipline? Those are the kinds of qualities that we have to actively cultivate in children. Otherwise, we end up with a society with adults who are sociopaths, right? And who are dangerous to us. And all of that work needs to happen in school. You can never offer children an amoral education.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Best wishes and good luck, and we'll help you.
Thanks, Karen. I appreciate it. It's great to be here at Calvin.
My guest today has been Pedro Noguera, sociologist and education professor at New York University and author of several books on public education. He helped form the public policy group Broader, Bolder Approach to Education, a campaign that addresses the impact of social and economic disadvantages on schools. I'm Karen Soppe. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.